going to read off to you guys.
Listen, we're already impressed, okay?
All right. It's utilitarianism. Its fundamental principle is that which provides the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. Happiness, goodness, and utility, all else is an exercise in futility. A hedonistic society that Bentham measured in hedons, quantifying happiness, posed a problem to every philosopher beyond. If pleasure is our center, then I can break and enter. Always taking from others what I want for myself, because I ultimately live for happiness and simply nothing else. But that means others can steal from me, and I fear is all we'd see. Another prisoner's dilemma of us getting in the way of me. Perhaps indirect adherence could provide a solution, allowing the state to enact laws to legislate retribution. This would surely justify the state, but herein lies the gravest problem of the utilitarian state. Always act in the name of the majority, jailing innocent individuals could be more than an anomaly. Picture a bombing harming a mall full of patrons shopping. Cue the news anchors talking and the public gawking. The manhunt for suspects suddenly becomes suspect when the media concludes the investigation that hasn't even begun yet. The public's plea for justice becomes the greatest good, and the importance of the suspect's guilt fades into the woods. You see, if scapegoating an innocent person provides the means to an end, then the life of an individual becomes reasonable to expend. It could be argued that we could again reason indirectly, but that undermines the fundamental principle explicitly and directly, thus necessitating an establishment of individual rights, and this is where John Stuart Mill on Liberty picks up the mic.
Fuck, you made it so hard for the rest of us.
All right, so as you guys see, I have the things on the bottom here to figure out the concepts that I put together. You know, all the asterisks are like concepts or things that we should all know. So the first one is fundamental principle. It's pretty straightforward. The second line or third line down is the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. So if you guys want to fill that in, that that's exactly what it is. Then we go down to number one, which I marked off. A hedonistic society, Bentham, Jeremy Bentham, the founder of utilitarianism, is what Wolff said was quantifying happiness. There's a problem that everybody had to do. We'd have to know how to pick certain situations which would make the most happiness of any situation. So we'd have to quantify happiness, and I thought it was cool. He actually developed a thing called hedonistic calculus, where he used hedons as a gauge of happiness. Like one hedon would mean X amount of happiness, which is cool. 2, pleasure is our center, then I can break an enter. Anybody want to take that? Anybody know what I mean when I say that? Kate.
Sometimes in order to fulfill your happiness, then you may be justified in breaking the law. So
Absolutely.
if you want something in someone else's house that will make you happy, then you're justified in going to seek it out.
Well done. That's exactly it. So we can move on there. But that means other people can steal from me, and fear is all we'd see. Another prisoner's dilemma is us getting in the way of me. Anybody remember Prisoner's Dilemma? What we were talking about with that?
Tragedy of the commons. It's another.
What was that?
No.
What's best for the individuals and best for the collectives.
Well, that's kind of it, yeah. When we all look out for what we want for ourselves, if we all do that, it could harm all of us together. Like Wolff talked about, if we all stole from everybody, we'd all take everybody else's stuff. We'd be scared to own stuff because we couldn't have anything. So that completely destroys the concept of ownership and doing anything. So we don't want to own anything anymore. That was that. So lastly, or not lastly, we have a couple of the double asterisk, indirect adherence. Wolff talked about a concept of non-utilitarian thinking to avoid problems like breaking the law that we were talking about before. It may not be in our greatest happiness to obey laws because we want to steal or do whatever we do to make us happy. But if we do non-utilitarian thinking of obeying a system of laws, that will essentially create a better situation of happiness for everybody. Yeah?
Is that how you feel?
So with utilitarianism, fundamental principle, happiness for yourself, happiness for the whole collective. That's what the whole principle is. Right. So that in turn could justify you breaking the law to steal what you want.
Right.
But like I said, with the prisoner's dilemma, if that happens, we can create a state of everybody stealing from everybody else. So ultimately, nobody's happy anymore.
Okay.
So utilitarian thinking won't work.
Okay.
So we have to switch to non-utilitarian thinking, which is the opposite of putting the immediate happiness first. And one of the things we could do is enact laws. And in doing so, we could guarantee a more happier state if we enact laws and everybody obeys them, where we could have stuff and be safer.
Thank you.
So indirect so that's non-utilitarianism. A couple more lines down. This would surely justify the state. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Right? How am I doing, Professor? All right?
Good, yeah.
Okay.
Time-wise? Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. Kate, you want to contribute?
I think, well, that goes hand in hand with the non-utilitarianism idea, and in the book they reference the Lotus Eaters, who have this idea that you can't just get happiness directly. There are other means to get it that are side effects. So sometimes the laws being in place is what leads us to the happiness eventually. So the justification there could be that there is a pathway for obtaining this happiness, but it's not direct, and it's following a system.
Absolutely.
Another thing is that I think what you're referring to is that they kept the utilitarian, the people who endorse utilitarianism would keep tweaking it so it would, conform to what we know is right, and then that just,
Okay.
and so we just need a way to justify the state in utilitarian's name, but if we're just keep, molding it as a,
I see. Yeah, and a way of justifying the state, if we enacted laws, that would guarantee everybody's happiness, because we all want happiness because we're utilitarians, and if a governing body can enact laws to get us there, to make us a better, happier state, then the state would be justified in enacting those laws. Does that make sense? All right. And the last 4 is probably the most interesting thing, which is also the biggest problem probably in utilitarianism, which is scapegoating. So did you guys understand what I said here? Does anybody else want to talk about that before I talk about it?
Basically, I got this. Basically,
Write it down.
but I got it. Well, I'm not as good as him, but what I got from it was that, like, the happiness of an individual or the, consequence or the outcome of an individual doesn't mean much in comparison to, like, the happiness of the whole. So, like, they're basically willing to sacrifice the individual for, like, the total. Like Machiavelli said, like, the end justifies the means almost. So like, this concept is like applied to like the whole utilitarian, like, happiness of the whole is like better than the happiness of the individual level.
Absolutely. It's a really scary thought. I mean, think about my situation here, which is also in the book that he assigned as extra reading. If there's a terrorist bombing, which actually the Birmingham 6 is apparently. Oh, I'm jumping all over the place. Terrorist bombing. Think about a terrorist bombing goes down. We're all scared because that happened, and we're all fear our safety. And so we watch the news and we see a bunch of suspects pop up, like the guys in the Boston Marathon. We don't really know if those. I guess they had a trial, but I don't know. Actually, they had a trial. But almost before we have the trial, we kind of criminalize those guys. We're like, those are the guys that did it, because for our peace of mind, our happiness, we'd be happy just having somebody brought to justice. And that's really all that matters. So if that's what matters for us, is somebody brought to justice, the first suspects on TV may not be guilty, but if they're brought to justice, then we could sacrifice them in the name of our we can rationalize that's in our best interest, sacrifice the individual for the greater good of everybody else, which is scary, isn't it?
That's interesting because that's something you referenced about who we believe the suspects are, because I remember during the Boston bombing, the media was saying something along the lines of that they were black folks and they didn't even know who it was at that point. And then they had to retract their statements about them being 2 black men when they actually weren't.
Absolutely.
Wow.
You want to contribute something, Kate?
That was terrifying to me reading about the scapegoating argument, because then they went on to say that scapegoating can be justified so long as we don't know we're being fooled.
I know. That's
In this argument, that was horrifying. That to me was very sort of dualistic separation between government and state, and I didn't like that.
Sure, it's happened many
But
times.
then we can start talking about controversial theories in anything, really. And
Yeah, but I
government
feel like-
hiding things.
I feel like that was a very broad statement though, because technically, like, you don't know you're being lied to until you know the truth. So like, this is basically the same concept. Like, you kind of have to take with a grain of salt. Like, ignorance is bliss to a certain extent. Like, you know, you really don't know. If you don't know anything, like, can you really have a reaction to it? So.
I think the idea here, though, is that somebody knows the line's being done, which is what made me nervous in the idea.
But it's saying, is that okay with people, with small amount of people suffering? Is that okay?
You don't want to know what I think.
All right. So we'll move on from that. I mean, it's really a crazy thought. So ultimately, that conversation really, like you just said, I don't want to know what you're thinking. That really boils down to how much we value the individual, and how much rights they should have, because we could put them to bring them to justice, send them to jail, like it sounds like that's what you're suggesting. Or should there be rights, and we should stand up for justice and what truly for every individual is the right thing to do. So that's where it ends. This guy John Stuart Mill, he wrote On Liberty, and the 4th chapter is all about. He's a utilitarian thinker. It's all about the rights that we're all justified to, or we deserve in a utilitarian state. I'm reading it for another class. It's pretty good stuff. All right.
He's Mill's my favorite.
Yeah, it's some good stuff. So I have another one, but I don't have to read it if you don't want.
I think in the interest of time, we probably shouldn't. Unless you want to do it really quick, why don't you read it to us quickly?
All right, cool. So this is on the principle of fairness. What we got here when we're talking about HLA Hart. Political obligation creates a problematic situation where consent from an individual is never given but somehow taken. Hart's principle of fairness is all about awareness. For if we are aware of the benefits we receive, then to the state's mandates we must concede. It would simply not be fair to enjoy the security and stability and reserve a stance of politically obligated ambiguity. According to Hart, receiving means conceding. On this, Hume doesn't assume but surely defends the state, believing humans' passions would set our passions straight. So why wouldn't we want the protection of the state? While Hume doesn't believe in political obligation, Nozick nixes the principle of fairness in his repudiation. He wonders how it's unfair to refuse participation when he never agreed to the entire situation. Suppose a merchant shoves a piece of candy in your pocket. Does that mean you have to pay him although you didn't want it? Isn't that unfair as well? Thus, the principle of fairness may have improved upon consent, but in settling the problem of political obligation, it didn't make a dent.
It's
Yeah,
pretty amazing.
Awesome.